My beloved child. Pause here for a moment. Do not rush past these words. Something is waiting for you. Something that was moving quietly beneath the surface of your life long before you arrived here. Perhaps you thought this message would be like the others. Perhaps you believed you would hear familiar promises, familiar comforts, familiar encouragements, and then continue with your day unchanged. But there is a reason your eyes stopped here. There is a reason your spirit became still, even if only for a moment. And there is a reason heaven is drawing your attention toward a person whose presence has occupied corners of your heart that no one else has been able to reach. Listen carefully. Because what is unfolding around you is not as invisible as you think. For a long time you have wondered what lies inside the silence between you and this person. You have searched expressions. You have analyzed words. You have replayed conversations in your mind. You have questioned what was genuine and what was imagined. You have stood at the edge of uncertainty and asked questions no one around you could answer. Do they think about me? Do they remember me? Do they feel what I feel? Do I matter to them as much as they matter to me? And while those questions echoed through your heart, another story was unfolding beyond your sight. A story that did not need your permission to begin. A story that continued even on days when you felt forgotten. A story that moved forward even during moments when it appeared nothing was happening at all. My child, there are conversations that occur behind closed doors. There are moments that happen when no audience is present. There are confessions spoken softly when no one realizes heaven is listening. And what I am about to reveal concerns one of those moments. The person you love may have opened up about you. Not in the dramatic way you imagined. Not in the perfect scene your mind created during sleepless nights. Not with flawless words. Not with complete certainty. But something shifted. Something escaped their heart that they could no longer keep entirely hidden. You see, people often carry emotions much longer than they admit. They build walls around feelings they do not fully understand. They create distractions. They stay busy. They convince themselves they are unaffected. Yet emotions have a way of pressing against locked doors until eventually something gives way. And recently, something may have given way. What makes this moment extraordinary is not merely what was said. It is why it was said. Because people reveal what matters to them. They speak about what occupies their thoughts. They discuss what lingers in their hearts. They mention what they cannot fully release. And your name, or the memory of you, has been living somewhere within them longer than you realize. I want you to imagine something. Imagine a quiet evening. No grand event. No dramatic music. No signs in the sky. Just an ordinary moment. A conversation begins. The topic changes unexpectedly. Someone asks a question. Someone notices a change. Someone mentions relationships, memories, hopes, regrets, or possibilities. And suddenly the person you love says something about you. Maybe it surprised even them. Maybe they did not intend to speak your name. Maybe they intended to remain guarded. But hearts reveal themselves in unexpected moments. That is one of the mysteries woven into human experience. You think you control every word. Yet emotions often choose their own path. And when that happened, a door opened. Only slightly. Only for a moment. But enough. Enough for another soul to see that you occupy space within their inner world. My child, I know how often you have doubted your significance. I know how many times disappointment taught you to expect less. I know how many nights you prepared yourself for silence because hope felt dangerous. You learned to protect yourself. You learned not to expect too much. You learned to hide your deepest desires behind careful smiles. Yet even now there remains a quiet part of you that longs to know the truth. Not the imagined truth. Not wishful thinking. Not fear. The real truth. And that longing is why this message found you. Because the truth is more layered than you think. The person you love is not fighting only circumstances. They are also wrestling with themselves. They have questions they have not answered. They carry memories they have not sorted through. They possess emotions that do not fit neatly into categories. Part of them wants clarity. Part of them fears clarity. Part of them wants to move forward. Part of them fears what moving forward could require. And while this inner battle continued, something remarkable happened. You remained present. Not necessarily physically. Not necessarily through constant communication. But within the landscape of their thoughts. You appeared unexpectedly. A memory surfaced. A phrase reminded them of you. A song carried your presence into a room you never entered. A place brought your image into focus. A random moment became a doorway back to thoughts of you. And each time that happened, the emotional weight became harder to ignore. There are people who disappear from our minds because they never truly reached our hearts. Then there are people whose influence remains long after conversations end. You, my child, may be far more unforgettable than you realize. This is why what happened matters. Because opening up about someone is not merely sharing information. It is revealing importance. It is exposing attachment. It is acknowledging impact. And impact leaves evidence. Sometimes subtle evidence. Sometimes evidence hidden inside seemingly ordinary sentences. Perhaps they said they missed talking to you. Perhaps they mentioned your kindness. Perhaps they described your strength. Perhaps they laughed while recalling a memory. Perhaps they grew unexpectedly quiet. Perhaps someone noticed a change in their voice. Perhaps someone saw emotion appear where emotion was not expected. The details matter less than the reality beneath them. The reality is that something inside them moved. And movement always begins before visible change arrives. You have been measuring progress by what you can see. Heaven often measures progress by what is happening underneath. Seeds grow underground before anyone sees green leaves. Dawn begins before sunlight touches the earth. Transformation starts before evidence becomes visible. Remember this. Because many people abandon hope moments before the breakthrough they were waiting for. They mistake hidden progress for no progress. They mistake silence for absence. They mistake delay for defeat. Do not make that mistake. Not now. Not when unseen things are already in motion. My beloved child, there is another reason this message is reaching you today. Because there is something you do not fully understand about the power of being remembered. Many people seek attention. Few people achieve genuine remembrance. Attention is loud but temporary. Remembrance is quiet but enduring. Attention can disappear in minutes. Remembrance can survive years. And somewhere within this person's life, your presence has become part of a story they continue carrying. Whether they intended it or not. Whether they understand it or not. Whether they admit it completely or not. You remain there. That reality creates tension within them. Because once a heart acknowledges significance, it must eventually decide what to do with it. Ignore it? Suppress it? Explore it? Act upon it? Run from it? Embrace it? These questions create storms inside people. And the person you love has not been entirely untouched by those storms. There have been moments when they tried to focus elsewhere. Moments when they attempted to convince themselves they were unaffected. Moments when they believed distance would simplify everything. Yet every time they thought the emotional chapter was closing, something happened. A reminder. A memory. A feeling. A question. A moment of unexpected honesty. And the chapter remained open. Not because anyone forced it open. Because truth has a way of surviving. Truth does not always shout. Sometimes it simply refuses to disappear. You must understand this. The strongest emotions are not always the loudest ones. The deepest feelings often live beneath the surface. Calm oceans can conceal powerful currents. Quiet hearts can contain enormous battles. Silent people can carry profound love. This is why appearances can be misleading. You have been looking for signs in obvious places. Yet some of the most meaningful developments have occurred where human eyes rarely look. Inside private moments. Inside solitary reflections. Inside conversations that seemed ordinary at first. Inside brief admissions that revealed more than intended. And now heaven asks you to consider a possibility. What if the story is not over? What if what was spoken about you was only the beginning? What if that conversation was not the destination but the first visible sign of something awakening? Sit with that thought. Do not rush away from it. Because there is more. Much more. You see, after people reveal a truth, they cannot entirely forget that they revealed it. Once spoken, it exists. Once acknowledged, it demands attention. Once admitted, it changes the landscape of the heart. The person you love may now find themselves revisiting what they said. Thinking about it. Questioning it. Examining it. Wondering why those words came out. Wondering why emotions surfaced. Wondering why your name continues appearing in their mind. And every question leads deeper. Every reflection opens another door. Every door reveals another layer. This is how emotional awakenings often begin. Not with certainty. With curiosity. Not with confidence. With realization. Not with answers. With questions that refuse to disappear. My child, some people spend years avoiding the truths that matter most. Yet avoidance has limits. Eventually life creates a moment when honesty becomes easier than pretending. Perhaps that moment is approaching. Perhaps it has already begun. Perhaps the conversation that included you was the first crack in a wall that has stood for a very long time. Walls seem permanent until they begin to break. Then suddenly everything changes. But before change becomes visible, there is always tension. Pressure. Movement. Preparation. You are currently witnessing the preparation stage. The stage most people misunderstand. The stage where nothing appears dramatic from the outside. The stage where heaven is working quietly. The stage where hearts are being confronted with realities they can no longer ignore. Do not underestimate this stage. Great transformations often begin here. And while you are listening to these words, another truth must be spoken. This message is not merely about them. It is also about you. Because while they may have opened up about you, there is something your own heart has been hiding. You have been carrying expectations mixed with fear. Hope mixed with caution. Desire mixed with self-protection. You want clarity. Yet part of you fears what clarity might reveal. You want answers. Yet part of you fears disappointment. You want movement. Yet part of you worries movement could change everything. This internal conflict has exhausted you more than you realize. And heaven sees it. Every question. Every silent prayer. Every moment when you stared into the distance wondering if your feelings were leading somewhere meaningful. You were never invisible during those moments. Not once. Even when answers seemed absent. Even when signs seemed scarce. Even when circumstances felt frozen. You were seen. You were heard. You were understood. And that understanding is part of why this message arrives now instead of earlier. Because timing matters. There are truths people are not ready to hear until a specific moment arrives. And a specific moment is approaching. I say approaching because the story is still unfolding. The pages are still turning. The next chapter has not yet fully revealed itself. But signs are appearing. Subtle signs. Quiet signs. The kind of signs most people miss because they expect lightning when heaven often works through whispers. Listen closely. A whisper can change a life. A single conversation can redirect a future. One honest admission can alter the course of two hearts. And somewhere in the unfolding mystery surrounding this connection, honesty is beginning to stir. Not complete honesty. Not yet. But enough to create movement. Enough to create possibility. Enough to begin shifting what once seemed immovable. My beloved child, there is one final thing you must understand before this part of the message comes to an end. The conversation you know about is not necessarily the only conversation. Read that again within your spirit. The conversation you know about is not necessarily the only conversation. Because when a heart begins opening, it rarely happens only once. One admission leads to another. One reflection creates another. One moment of vulnerability invites another. And recently there has been a growing restlessness surrounding this person. A restlessness connected to unfinished emotions. Unanswered questions. Unspoken truths. They may not fully understand it. They may not even recognize its source. Yet it continues growing. Quietly. Persistently. Like a tide rising beneath the surface. And what heaven sees next is what should capture your attention. Because after that first opening, after that first moment when your name, your memory, or your significance escaped the guarded places within them, something unexpected happened. Someone responded. Someone noticed. Someone said something back. Words were exchanged. Questions were asked. And the reaction that followed revealed far more than anyone anticipated. Far more than they intended. Far more than they were prepared to confront. The moment seemed small. Almost insignificant. Yet what happened afterward has the potential to change everything. And the person you love has not been the same since. But what exactly was said? Who noticed? And why did that single response shake loose emotions that had remained hidden for so long? That, my child, is where the next part of this message begins. The response came so casually that at first it seemed harmless. Just a few words. A simple observation. The kind of thing people say every day without realizing they have touched something deeper than they intended. Yet the moment those words were spoken, the person you love felt something shift inside them. Not because the statement was dramatic. Not because it carried some great revelation. But because it forced them to look directly at a truth they had been avoiding. For a brief moment, they could no longer hide behind distractions. They could no longer escape into busyness. They could no longer convince themselves that what they felt was insignificant. The conversation continued, but their attention had already changed. Part of them was listening. Part of them was somewhere else entirely. Their mind had traveled back to memories connected to you. Moments they thought they had already processed. Moments they believed had lost their emotional power. Yet suddenly those memories felt alive again. A smile they remembered. A conversation they never forgot. A feeling they could not explain. An unfinished thought that had remained waiting in a hidden corner of their heart. The strange thing about emotions is that they rarely disappear simply because we want them to. People can bury feelings. Ignore them. Distract themselves from them. Pretend they no longer exist. But emotions that are connected to something meaningful often find their way back to the surface. And that is exactly what began happening. The person you love found themselves thinking about you long after the conversation ended. Hours passed. Yet the thoughts remained. Days moved forward. Yet something continued pulling their attention toward your memory. At first they resisted it. They told themselves they were overthinking. They told themselves it meant nothing. They tried to redirect their focus toward other things. But every attempt seemed to bring them back to the same place. Back to you. Back to questions they had never fully answered. Back to emotions they had never completely understood. And as this continued, something unexpected started happening. The image they carried of you began changing. Not because you changed. Because their understanding changed. Sometimes people only recognize someone's value after enough time has passed for perspective to develop. Sometimes distance reveals things that proximity concealed. Sometimes absence teaches lessons presence never could. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they started seeing you differently. Details they once overlooked suddenly felt important. Qualities they once took for granted began standing out. Conversations they once considered ordinary started carrying new meaning. It was as if pieces of a puzzle they had ignored were finally fitting together. Yet with every realization came a new challenge. Because recognition creates responsibility. Once a person understands what someone means to them, they can no longer claim ignorance. They can no longer pretend they do not know. And that awareness can feel overwhelming. Especially when emotions are involved. Especially when vulnerability is involved. Especially when the heart begins demanding honesty. The person you love has been standing at the edge of that honesty. Not fully stepping forward. Not fully stepping back. Caught somewhere in between. And that in-between place has become increasingly difficult to remain in. Because the heart was never designed to stay divided forever. Eventually choices must be made. Eventually truths must be faced. Eventually feelings must be acknowledged. That is why recent days have carried a different energy around them. Even if nobody else noticed. Even if they themselves struggled to understand it. Something has been changing. A growing awareness. A growing curiosity. A growing inability to ignore what once seemed easy to ignore. And with that awareness came another realization. You were not merely a passing chapter. You were not merely a temporary thought. You were not merely another face in a long line of memories. You left an imprint. The kind that remains. The kind that quietly influences future decisions. The kind that resurfaces when life becomes quiet enough for honesty to speak. For a while they tried not to examine that reality too closely. Because examining it meant confronting questions they were not ready to answer. What if these feelings never truly disappeared? What if they still care more than they admit? What if they have been carrying unfinished emotions all this time? What if the connection means more than they previously believed? Questions like these are powerful. Not because they immediately provide answers. Because they refuse to leave. Once they appear, they continue knocking. Again and again. And recently those questions have been knocking louder. The person you love may appear calm on the outside. But internally there has been movement. Moments of reflection. Moments of hesitation. Moments when they almost reached out. Moments when they considered saying something. Moments when they replayed possibilities in their mind. Then stopped themselves. Then started again. Then questioned themselves. Then returned once more to thoughts of you. This cycle has repeated more than you realize. And every repetition has weakened the walls they spent so long building. Because walls require energy to maintain. Eventually maintaining them becomes exhausting. Eventually authenticity feels easier than resistance. Eventually truth becomes stronger than fear. That process is still unfolding. Yet what makes this moment important is not merely what they are feeling. It is what they are beginning to understand. They are beginning to understand that certain people enter our lives for reasons that cannot be explained by logic alone. Certain connections leave marks that time cannot easily erase. Certain bonds continue speaking long after silence arrives. You have become one of those bonds. And whether they admit it openly today or not, that realization has already begun changing something inside them. There have been moments recently when your name appeared unexpectedly. Moments when someone else mentioned something that reminded them of you. Moments when they encountered a place, a phrase, a song, or a memory connected to your presence. What should have been ordinary suddenly felt personal. What should have been forgettable suddenly felt meaningful. And every reminder carried the same unspoken question. Why am I still thinking about this? Why does this still matter? Why does this person still occupy space within me? The answer frightened them because it was simpler than they expected. It still matters because the connection still matters. And that truth is becoming harder to deny. Yet there is another layer to this story. A layer that even they may not fully recognize yet. Because while they have been examining their feelings, someone around them has noticed changes. Small changes. Subtle changes. The kind of changes that reveal themselves through expressions, pauses, and reactions. Someone has seen the way your name affects them. Someone has noticed how conversations shift when you are mentioned. Someone has observed emotional responses that cannot be easily explained away. And that observation has created new conversations. Conversations that continue pushing them toward honesty. Conversations that continue challenging the narratives they once relied upon. Conversations that continue bringing your presence back into focus. This matters because outside perspectives often reveal truths people cannot see on their own. Sometimes another person notices what we are trying to hide. Sometimes another person asks the question we have been avoiding. Sometimes another person becomes the mirror that reflects reality back to us. That mirror has appeared. And the reflection is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The person you love is beginning to realize that running from emotions does not eliminate them. It only delays the moment of confrontation. And confrontation is drawing closer. Not through force. Not through pressure. But through awareness. Awareness has a way of changing everything. Once awareness arrives, old patterns lose their power. Old excuses lose their effectiveness. Old walls begin developing cracks. And through those cracks, truth starts finding light. There is still uncertainty. There are still unanswered questions. There are still fears. But alongside those fears, something else has emerged. Hope. Not loud hope. Not obvious hope. The quiet kind. The kind that appears before someone fully understands why. The kind that whispers possibilities they once dismissed. The kind that makes them wonder whether a different future is still possible. That hope has been growing. Slowly. Patiently. Almost invisibly. Yet it is there. And it is influencing more than they realize. Because hope changes perception. Hope changes choices. Hope changes what people are willing to consider. The person who once avoided certain thoughts now finds themselves returning to them. The person who once dismissed possibilities now finds themselves questioning those dismissals. The person who once felt certain now finds themselves wondering. Wondering is where transformation often begins. Not certainty. Wondering. The willingness to ask what if. The willingness to reconsider. The willingness to imagine another outcome. And lately, they have been asking more what if questions than ever before. What if they misunderstood their own feelings? What if they walked away too soon? What if the connection still has something left to reveal? What if the story was never actually finished? Those questions have not yet produced final answers. But they have produced movement. And movement is significant. Because stagnant hearts do not move. Closed hearts do not question. Disconnected hearts do not wonder. Yet this heart has been doing all three. Questioning. Reflecting. Wondering. That is why the energy surrounding this connection feels different now. Something is shifting beneath the surface. Something is preparing itself. Something is approaching a point where remaining silent may become more difficult than speaking honestly. And when that moment arrives, everything that has been hidden will have an opportunity to step into the light. But before that happens, one more realization must occur. A realization so personal, so unexpected, and so emotionally powerful that it catches them completely off guard. It happens during a moment they never planned for. A moment that appears ordinary at first. A moment that begins like any other. Yet before it ends, they encounter something that forces them to confront what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. And when that realization finally arrives, the direction of this story begins changing faster than anyone expects. What they discover in that moment, and why it leaves them unable to think about you the same way again, is where part 3 begins.